everybody. We hope you all had a Merry Christmas and had a wonderful time with family and friends.
We also want to make sure we invite everybody to the 2021 ACCAs. That's going to be at Kilo Sierra Quebec India Airport, which is the Whiteside County Airport near Sterling, Illinois. The inaugurational ACCAs was this year,
right,
and was well received, and it looks like for 2021 it's going to be bigger and better. Around Christmas we always think about presents. However, this Christmas, instead of presents, maybe we need to embrace the presence of our loved ones, and for some of us that's no longer possible. Dan Grider a while back contacted us and asked if we'd be interested in doing an accident case study. Now, at first I was a little hesitant or reluctant for several reasons. Number one, there are a lot of more experienced pilots with thousands of hours, most of them with military experience or airline experience, that have the knowledge and the base to be able to make comments on an accident case study. And I told Dan, I said, Dan, I'm only a couple of 100-hour pilot. I don't have enough experience to comment or to make an assessment of what someone should or shouldn't have done. And a few weeks went by and he talked to me again and he said, well, I got one I want you to look at. And so I kind of hesitantly, reluctantly agreed to do that. And when I downloaded the files on it,
the very large file, but once you got into it and started looking at all the information, it was just a bit kind of captivating.
Or riveting, yeah.
Riveting, yeah. Just to try to figure out what had happened and what could have been done differently. And not to say that you or I would have done anything differently. It's hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think that's why you were hesitant to even look at this study and make your assessment of it, because it's difficult to say, what would I have done? Or, oh, I would have done things totally differently. I would have done this, or this, but you just never know until you're actually in that situation. And in this, as you went through looking at what had occurred, there were errors made by every party involved.
Yeah, we sometimes call this the tragedy of commons. Where a pilot files a flight plan and then ATC amends the flight plan. The pilot, because the aircraft may or may not be able to fly that altitude, suggests another altitude. The ATC accepts the pilot's input and then puts him on as Paul already says, the rest of the story. Let's first give a little background. The pilot and his 3 sons that were in Jackson Hole, Wyoming for a family event.
Right.
And they were getting ready to depart, and weather conditions prevented him from going, so that showed good ADM on his part.
Right.
And then he said, well, we'll just go commercial and fly back commercial. Well, he gets on the plane and there's an issue with the plane and the flight's canceled. So then he goes, okay, well, let's go back and we'll fly the next day when the weather's a little better. And it's kind of, he was just kind of chasing this. And so Janice had hit on it. I want you throughout the data and the information that unfolds, because if you already know it ends in a tragedy. So yeah, the first sign, people, oh no, I would have stopped right there. Well, you don't know. I'm going to put a link up here. A couple of 3 years ago, we were sitting right here talking about ADM
and decision making,
matrix that we went through about flying down, and it was tough because I could put myself in this pilot's shoes.
Right.
You wanted to get somewhere. I needed to get somewhere because Janice's mom was in critical condition and was going to pass away. We could fly and we could make it in time to say last goodbyes, or we could drive and,
possibly not make
it, which
In which we didn't.
This was 50 pages of documentation. And I told Dan Grider, I said, Dan, I'm afraid I'm not going to do this justice for several reasons. And he just said, well, you're a pilot and you're a parent. Do it from that perspective. And I tell you, and Janice will admit to this, I spent several hours on it and I pushed away and I just said, I can't do this. And the more I got into it, I started becoming a little more connected to the family and the tragedy of this loss. And I honestly don't know how some people do this on a regular basis.
I know, to do these studies.
Set your mind to look at this as it happening to you each step of the way. I'm going to, throughout this video, mention a red flag. This would raise a red flag. And at what point would one or all of these red flags be the point where you would say, this is a go or a no-go decision?
Right.
The pilot had several weather briefings prior to takeoff, and the weather was changing rapidly. So this raises a red flag. 9:18, initial weather briefing. 10:37, abbreviated weather briefing. Both weather briefings included airments for mountain obscurations, turbulence, and icing along the planned flight routes and altitudes. PIREPS, 8:12. Aircraft over JAC reported cloud tops above 15,000 feet, light turbulence, and no icing. At 0820, aircraft departing JAC reported cloud tops at 18,000 feet, light chop, and a trace of mixed icing from 10,000 to 18,000 feet. TAF area forecast, briefer and pilot discussed existing conditions would exist until noon and then improve somewhat in an end to the precipitation. Conditions at RIW were slightly better than forecasted. 10:37, updated briefing. PIREP, 10:20. Aircraft departing JAC reported light chop and cloud tops above 14,000 feet. At 11:51, conditions had improved slightly with 3 miles visibility, light snow, broken layer at 2,700 feet, overcast at 3,600 feet. At 12:54, observations at the time of takeoff reported 4 miles of visibility, light snow, broken layer at 1,500 feet, and overcast at 4,500 feet. I just want you to know that he was staying on top of the ever-changing weather, and I'm just making an assumption here that he was looking for a window. All right, now let's talk about FIKI, or flight into known ice. The Mooney is not equipped, or FIKI equipped, to be able to fly into known icing conditions. All right, let's look at the weight and balance. It was a grown male adult and 3 young boys. Best estimations are that the pilot was in the front seat, the 12-year-old, or the youngest son, was sitting in the right front seat, and the 2 14-year-old twins were in the back seat. They had to estimate the weight based on CDC estimates for young boys of that age and photos, and they estimated about 81 pounds for clothing and baggage. So based on those estimates, the takeoff weight was within the maximum gross weight, or right at maximum gross weight of the plane. Okay, we're flying in Jackson Hole area, and when I was looking at the first flight plans that the pilot filed at 14,000 feet, well, oxygen now becomes an issue.
Right.
So for cabin pressures, 30 minutes of duration above 12,500 feet, and including 14,000 feet MSL, you have oxygen available for the passengers, but the pilot and crew is required. So that may be why he wanted to fly to 14,000 feet instead of 16,000 feet, which was the initial altitude that ATC had given him. So records had indicated at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, that he did pay for and fill the oxygen bottle. So it was full and readily available.
I believe too, he had cannulas for 2 people, or enough oxygen for 2 people. What was the...
Well, he had cannulas for 2, but the evidence doesn't suggest or deny whether or not 2 people were using the oxygen.
Right.
Okay, so at the altitudes he was flying at, the passengers weren't required to have oxygen.
Right.
It just needed to be available. Now, we can debate, was it truly available? There's 4 people on board, but a 2-person oxygen.
Right.
I'll leave that one up to an open discussion. So it was available, but there was not 4 cannulas available.
So this raises a red flag.
You know, Ron, you're talking about as this man moves forward in the flight, conditions begin to deteriorate. It's some light chop, there's some icing. You know, there's nothing wrong with turning around and going back. You know, I think you do the same thing, I think, a lot of times in a car driving. You think, oh, well, if I can just go just a little further, I'll be out of this. And I think sometimes, same thing when you're experiencing engine trouble and all, they say, you know, sometimes the best place to land is behind you. Well, I think in this case, he should have made the decision to turn around and just go back. Get the plane on the ground. The terrain, you know, we're used to flying in Kansas where there's often a place that you can put a plane down with really no consequence probably to the plane. And the terrain that he was flying over, and you'll see photos of the crash site, there would have been no place to safely put a plane down.
Not in that area, no. And you know, so again, he'd flown there before, was familiar with the terrain and the altitude, but you're going to see that had he stuck with his original 2 flight plans, he might have been alive today.
Right. But you know, also, I think of when you have flown places and we have IFR clearances and that kind of thing, I really kind of think of those as like God. You know, those are the best you can get. You know, my decision's not even going to be as good as what the information that they have. So, you know, they're giving me the best information. So I don't know, me as a non-pilot, I would tend to go with, well, ATC told me this, they have the best information and they're giving me the best options.
Or the best route.
Yeah.
But there's one word a pilot needs to keep in his vocabulary and be ready to pull it at any time he's uncomfortable, and that's the word unable. If it doesn't feel right, doesn't sound right, unable, okay? When he was given the 3rd IFR route, the amended route, that was different from his first 2 filed routes, and then was amended as he was on the runway, and you're going to see the route, that was a red flag. I would have felt like that was the point in time to go, I'll stop, I'll taxi back to the FBO, let me look at this route. I didn't brief this route. I'm not familiar with this route. Why am I going on this route? Because when I look at his first 2 filed routes, there was just a very short segment that was over mountainous terrain. And then he was in an open V-valley that progressively got wider the further he got. And when I look at the amount of time he was in the air before he encountered a problem, he would have been well in that open valley, and he would have had options. The route he ended up flying maybe felt pressured by ATC, or like Janice said, you know, you kind of feel, they've got my best interest in mind. And it was just almost a comedy of errors that just dominoed. And you know, and I mentioned like the tragedy of the Commons. You know, where it's like, well, I thought you know what the Orokas were. Well, I wouldn't have thought you would have given me this route if you didn't know what the Orokas were, when I told you I could only get to 14,000 feet and back and forth.
Right. I think it all boils down to the fact that you are PIC.
And you hit the nail on the head.
You are the one that ultimately is in charge of that aircraft, of your passengers, and you have the right to say, I mean, I can't do that. Unable.
Yeah. It's, you know, think of it this way. ATC is not in the plane flying it with you.
Right.
You know, so, you know, their comfort or risk level, you know, it might be different. Now, bear in mind, I'm not blaming ATC.
Right.
But they had a little skin in the game on this accident.
Right. They did.
And that's the part when I was talking to Dan Greider on this one. I hurt for the family, because this
was so avoidable.
Yeah,
on so many levels, it was so avoidable.
There were so many red flags throughout this process that at any given time, you know, you can just go, okay, this isn't working.
Right.
We'll spend another day, or we'll try another commercial flight.
The first flight plan that he filed was from Jackson Hole to the Donor VOR, that's Delta November Whiskey. Then he was on a defined airway with the MEA, a minimum en route altitude of 14,000 feet, to the Boysen Reservoir VOR, that's Bravo Oscar Yankee. So let's look at the aerial map view of this route so we can get an idea of the terrain that he was encountering. I can only speculate that after reviewing this flight plan, he decided to file another flight plan going to the Riverton VOR, that's Romeo India Whiskey, as this would place his flight path more in the middle of the valley between the two mountain ranges. His flight plan had a filed altitude of 9,000 feet. However, if you look at the MEA, the minimum en route altitude is 14,000 feet, and the MOCA, the minimum obstruction clearance altitude, is 13,500 feet. So this raises a red flag. So if you look at the location of the crash site and his intended flight path, he's nearly 30 miles south of his intended route. So what happened? ATC amended his flight plan. Instead of departing to the north, would be departing to the south on runway 19, and this included the obstacle clearance departure Teton 3, which included the fix Kickney, Kilo India Charlie November Echo, and then to the Idaho Falls VOR India Delta Alpha, and then to the Dunar VOR as planned. Now this is where things get very convoluted. The pilot had filed two different routes. Both routes were on defined airways. ATC initially had issued an obstacle clearance departure on the Teton 3, which took him to the fix to Keckney and then to the Idaho Falls VOR, then along his assigned flight plan. However, prior to takeoff, ATC amended that and told him to go to Keckney and then to the Riverton VOR. This route would have taken him on an off-airway segment from Keckney to Riverton. Therefore, there are no MEAs or MOCAs are specified. Instead, according to the charts, you have an Oroka, which is an off-route obstruction clearance altitude. Unless otherwise specified by ATC, you go by what the charts indicate, and in that segment, it's 16,100 feet. However, ATC cleared him for 14,000 feet. So this raises a red flag. So now let's look at a VFR chart so we can see some of the topographical landscape of this route. Now, VFR charts have similar numbers as the Orokas but they're MEFs. These are maximum elevation figures, and that is the height of the highest object in that segment. Because your VFR, visual flight rules, you should be able to see the object in the void. The OROCAs actually are supposed to give you 2,000 feet of clearance above the highest object in that segment in mountainous terrain areas and 1,000 feet of clearance in non-mountainous terrain areas.
The pilot filed a report stating he was about 72 miles west of the Riverton VOR. That's Romeo India Whiskey, and we'll show some of that on the tape. And he was at 14,000 feet, and then he was encountering some light chop with traces of Rhine icing. So he was in fact experiencing some icing, and it was noted as such.
As a result of the loss of ATC communications and radar returns, the airplane was reported missing on Monday, October the 25th. The following day, on October 26th, a winter snowstorm moved through the area, which prevented most of the search activities. On October the 27th, ground and aerial search activities were under the direction of the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, and search and rescue SAR was concentrated on a 9 square mile area of the vicinity of the last radar return. A press release characterized the search area as one of the most remote areas of the lower 48 states. Terrain elevations range from 11,000 to 13,000 feet. On October the 28th, a weak emergency located transmitter, ELT, was detected. The wreckage was found in a small, steep drainage on the side of a mountain in a boulder field 7 days after the plane departed.
You know, the tragedy of it is there are 4 people whose presence will not be in their loved one's life based on a tragedy of the commons. And I don't know that I could do another one of these. It was tough. And Janice will tell you how many times I pushed away and kind of came back to it, and I kind of got frustrated and mad and upset. All the emotions kind of ran through because it was so preventable.
I think anyone who looks at these accident case studies, you know, will find pretty much those common elements, that it was preventable. I think anything, you know, I won't say anything, but there are so many of these that are preventable. And that's big on Dan Greider's plate. He wants to make sure that pilots are well informed and that they are not going to make these same mistakes. He does a lot of these, so I think he's where you're talking about. He sees so much of it, and it just breaks his heart to think that there are all these families, all these people that have their lives destroyed from things that could have been prevented. So.
And Dan will be the first to admit, if he has to step on some toes to get that message across, he's going to step on some toes if it saves, you know, someone's life. You had a blessed Christmas, and may 2021 just enriching every one of your lives.
Souls lost in this tragic event was pilot Luke Buckland, 41, of Minneapolis, 14-year-old twins Nate and Nick, and 12-year-old Noah.